Today's daf we're going to be learning is Kiddushin Daf Yud Zayin. Today's daf is dedicated by the Kerzner and Greenstone families in honor of Haleli Miriam Rosenblum, newly born to Rivka and Shuli Rosenblum. Shabbat Haleli in the spirit of Mom Auntie Miriam's memory, your love, happiness, and commitment, with love, happiness, and commitment to family, community, and to constant growth through learning. Mazal tov. Okay, today's daf, I will tell you, it's still a long daf, but it is much less complicated than the previous dafim. It's a little bit more straightforward. The drashot are not as confusing. Plus, I think that at this point, we're already much more familiar with the different psukim. Hopefully you are, about the evadim, so it should be a little bit simpler. Gufa, we're going to start from the end of yesterday's daf, about 10 lines from the bottom. Elu manikim lahem. We're now going back. We quoted some Braitot about this gift which we called severance pay, something like that. And in fact, we're going to see a lot of details regarding labor laws that really you can find, the same kind of issues you might see in questions about labor laws in modern day, kind of issues that they grappled with then as well. So this is the most similar to getting severance pay when you leave a job. So what we're going to now quote is there were different parts of this Braita that we quoted previously. There's part of the Braita we actually didn't quote. Now we're going to see the Braita in its entirety. So Elu manikim lahem. These are the people that get Hanakah, meaning not every Eved Ivri gets a gift. Which ones do, which ones don't. We're going to figure that out right now. Later, we're going to get to how much of a gift do they get, okay? And in what case, we're going to see now. So again, what case don't they get a gift? So number one, hayotze b'shanim u'b'yovel, that we said was true for men and women, right? They after 6 years and in the Jubilee year if they leave. U'b'mitata adon, which we said was probably specifically talking about the nirtza, who leaves if the master dies. Okay, this is something we're going to get to later. That means, later in today's daf, that means he doesn't get passed on to any heirs, no matter what, okay? As soon as the owner dies, he's free. But that's not true for a regular Eved Ivri. He gets passed on to what we saw yesterday, and we'll see it again today, more in detail. He gets passed on to sons. If the owner has sons, it goes to the sons. If he doesn't have sons, then it'll either be if he has daughters or if he has brothers, okay? If there's no daughters, then it goes to the brothers. If it's a case where he doesn't have any sons and it goes to daughters or brothers, then it doesn't get passed on, okay? This, by the way, I see you're asking me in the chat. This is specifically Eved Ivri. Eved Knani, of course, goes to the children because what did we learn? They definitely get passed on. That's part of your possessions, your inheritance. It goes on to any of your heirs. But here we're talking specifically about Eved Ivri, okay, Jewish slave. So now, and unless otherwise said, our whole topic right now is Eved Ivri. So just assume we're talking about Eved Ivri, unless we make a reference specifically to an Eved Knani. Okay, we're going to get to later an Eved Knani. So now they say the following. So Shanim, Yovel, or Mitad Adon, or Amad V'liyah B'simanim, right? Remember, the Jewish maidservant goes out when she reaches age, right? Puberty. Avav, here we get to who doesn't. And this we didn't see yesterday. Boleach, someone who runs away from his master. Now, this is pretty obvious, right? It's like you quit a job. It's the same thing, right? You run away. This one maybe is less obvious. In fact, we'll see the machloket about it. The second one is if you pay your way out early, you also don't get severance pay. But Rabbi Meir Omer Boleach en manikim lo, v'yotzei b'geraon kesef manikim lo. Rabbi Meir says no. Only if you run away, you don't get it. But if you work 2 years and then you pay your way out for the other 4 years, you get your severance pay for the 2 years you worked. Okay, maybe it's prorated or something. It's unclear. We don't really talk about that. Maybe it's not. Maybe you get the same gift that they get. We'll talk about later what gift you get. Anyway, there's a machloket about that. Rabbi Shimon Omer, and I'll just preface this. We really don't have time. I don't want to go into this, but there's a big debate about whether Rabbi Shimon is just explaining Tanakama's opinion and organizing it differently, or if there's some small point that they disagree on. I'm not going to get into it, though. We'll stick with big picture here. Rabbi Shimon Omer arba'a manikim lahem. There's 4, and this we saw already yesterday. There's 4 cases where they get, and 3 are relevant to men and 3 for women, right? Shlosha b'ish v'shlosha b'isha, even though it was weird, 4 should split into 2 and 2, but splits into 6 because, again, Yovel and Shanim are for both, and that's how we get to 6. Since a woman never gets her ear pierced and can't stay late, that one's not relevant for her. And the Yitziah B'Yovel isn't relevant to, the Simanim Be'ish is not relevant for a man. The Simanim, it only is applicable for her. And that's how we get to 6. That's just a repeat from yesterday. So now, Minna Hanemile. Where do we get this from? About that these are the people who get, and these are the people who don't get. Yacholo, Detanu Rabbanan. The Braita says the following. It's a classic Midrash Halakha. We're going to learn out the Halakha from the Psukim. So I think what we should do now is, before we even continue, let's read the Psukim about the gift. And then we'll notice as we're reading all the weird things that the Gemara is going to say. Oh, wait, this is a place for a drasha. So if you look in Dvarim Tet-Vav, that's where it talks about it. It's in the Psukim in the previous study guides. You have it in front of you. If a Jewish or servant or maidservant is sold to you, he works for you for 6 years. Later, we're going to get to that. Works for you, as if specifically you. That's going to deal when we get to the laws of inheritance. On the 7th year, send him free. Notice the word tishalchenu. You send him off. This word tishalchenu is going to appear a number of times, and that's going to be room for drasha. When you send him free from you, again, that free from you, where else is he leaving if not from you? That's going to be an extra word. Lo tishalchenu, again, we have the word tishalchenu. Don't send him rekam, empty-handed. We're going to come back to this word empty-handed later. Ha'anik ta'anik lo, give him a gift. Notice also double language. If you pay close attention now, everything later will be much easier because you'll notice all the weird things in the Psukim, or not weird, but unique. So double language, give him a gift, but again, it's very hard to translate into English because we don't speak double, but give him a gift, or right, it's not exactly like that, but give him a gift. From your sheep, or the general category of those kind of animals, from the goren, which is your wheat, and miikvecha, from your wine. Asher berachacha Hashem elokecha, from which God blessed you, titain lo. It sounds like, the way it really sounds, right? The way we view, if you look at labor laws from a certain vantage point anyway, right? The people who are hiring other people, they're the people with means. They should be giving to the people who have less, right? That kind of sounds like what it's saying. So take from all these things that you've been blessed. We're going to use this word, you've been blessed, to mean all sorts of different things. But right now, assume the simple reading. You have blessing, give him some of it. Okay. And then it makes sense it's saying this because remember, you once were slaves too, and you were in a difficult position, and God saved you, okay? And therefore, you're commanded this to do, okay? I'm just explaining the next things without actually reading it inside. Okay, that's the Psuki. So now the Braita says the following. You might have thought, well, that was the subject of this pasuk. It said, he works for 6 years. He leaves in the 7th year, give him gifts. So maybe only someone who leaves in the 7th year gets the gifts. How do you know that if you leave in the Jubilee year or the master dies? Now here you might think, maybe you don't get it. Why? Because you left early, right? You got out early. So that was your extra gift that you got out early. Maybe then you don't get a gift. So how do we get it? And Amai v'Re'ah b'Simanim, who also left early. Maybe they don't get it. Talmud Lomar, tishalchenu v'chi tishalchenu. Okay, so again, that extra word, tishalchenu, appeared a number of times to include extra cases. Well, in that case, yachol shanim arbeh, how far are we going to go with this? Maybe I'll include boreach v'yotzei b'geraon kesef. Maybe I'll include the ones that we already said are excluded, one who ran away or one who paid his way out early. Talmud Lomar, v'chi tishalchenu chavshim me'imach. If he goes free from you, misha shilucho me'imach. Yatsa boreach, who ran away not from you, he ran away on his own, or yotzei b'geraon kesef she'en shlucho me'imach. Even leaving early, you're leaving because you paid your way out, not because the master freed you. So those two are excluded. Now, Rabbi Meir, who disagrees with that, what's his basis for saying if you pay your way out, you actually do get the money? Well, boreach emanikim lo de'en shilucho me'imach, that he agrees with the first one. But yotzei b'geraon kesef she'shilucho me'imach. When you leave a geraon kesef, if you remember, we learned that whole word vehefda, which the verb was actually should have been on the woman. She redeems herself, but instead it's on the master. He redeems her. What does it mean he redeems her? He deducts the amount, which means he has to agree to this, by the way. So he is part of sending her off because since he deducts the amount, and that would be the same for an Eved Ivri, since they're part of the process. You are being sent out from them. That's how Rabbi Meir views it, and therefore you do get the gift. So that's how we got to who's in, who's out. Now they ask a question about the boreach. Okay? Theoretically, the Gemara wants to say, maybe if you run away, you still are being sent out from the master. Now, why is that? Because boreach hashlama bai, if you run away, you have to make up the days. Okay, if they find you and catch you, they'll make you come back, make up the days, and then you go free like everyone else goes free. How do we know this? D'Tanya, it says in a Braita. You have to work 6 years. So we're going to make you work the 6 years, even if you ran away. So if you're already going to do hashlama, make up the days that you missed, then, right, this also sounds like labor laws, right? You just don't go to work a number of days. You're going to have to make up those days at some point. Well, if you do that, we're going to make, right, then basically when you go free, the master is setting you free. So there is no case of boreach where you're not being set free from the master. Now, the Braita continues before we get to the answer. Yachol afilu chala, here we get to sick days. What if you're sick? Do you have to make them up? No. You're going to go free in the 7th year no matter what. So in other words, on one hand, it said you have to work 6 years. On the other hand, it says you're going to go free in the 7th year no matter what. So you have to work the 6 years. That means if you ran away, we're going to make you make up the days. But if you were sick, we don't make you make up sick days. Amar of Sheshet. So what's the answer? Extra question. A boreach is also sent out in the end. If you run away, you're and going to be sent out free from your master because you're going to have to make up the days. Well, now Rashi explains that what we're talking about is you ran away, and then the next day, I don't know why you ran away the day before Yovel, but the Jubilee year comes in. Maybe you didn't know about Yovel, I don't know, but the Jubilee year comes in. So now, in this case, the master's not going to make you do hashlama because you missed so little that it's not even worth it. He doesn't care that much what he's going to try to fight to get you back, finally get you back, make you make up the days for a half a day or 1 day. It's just not worth it for him. In that case, you actually went free because you ran away. So that's the case where we're talking about that you actually don't get a gift. But in a regular case, if let's say you ran away a year before, we're going to make you make up that year, and then you're actually going to be sent from the master, and then you will get that gift. So now, Mao detema, you might have thought, you need a special drasha to teach you this because you might have thought that in the end, well, it's true that you ran away and that gave you your freedom, but really the Jubilee year gave you your freedom. So maybe it's like leaving in the Jubilee year. Below Nikin saying, we won't penalize you, and you'll get the gift. Kamash no, you ran away, you lose your gift. This, by the way, is incentive not to run away just before the Jubilee year because you're going to lose that gift. Now we're going to go back to the sick. Okay, and the sick days. Very interesting question. Okay, so now that's the Braita, right? You might have thought that you're going to have to make up the days. You leave in the 7th year, even if you didn't make up your sickness. So now the Gemara says, what if you were sick all 6 years? You got sold into slavery, next day you get sick, and you didn't work a day. Now what? You're going to say, even kalak koshesh. Now they assume, since it didn't specify, it sounds like even if you were sick all 6, you don't have to make up the days. But doesn't it say in a Braita, chala shalosh va'avad shalosh eno chayav lashli? You were sick for 3 years and you worked 3 years. Okay, now we thought sick days, we were talking about days. You could be sick for 3 full years, not work a day. You don't have to make up any of those days. But chala koshesh chayav lashli. But if you were sick all 6 years, you're going to have to make it up. Now, there's an obvious problem with this Braita. What about 4 and 5, right? This is a classic case where we're going to say, Haguf Akashya. This contradicts itself because 3 would imply 3 and not 4, and 6 would imply 6 and not 4. So what are we going to do with 4 and 5? It seems like you come to a different conclusion from the first line and the second line. We'll get back there in a minute. So we have one Braita that says sick days, you don't have to make up. We have another Braita that says if you were sick all 6 years, you have to make up. So Amar Rav Sheshet, Vosema Semacha. When we said you don't have to make up even 6 years, even though it didn't say that, but we assume the assumption is even all 6 years, it's when you did some sort of work. And you were hired, you were sold to slave when we assumed you were going to work hard labor. But in the end, you were sick in bed, but you were able to sew. You couldn't, maybe you weren't sick in bed, but you were sick that you couldn't work outside. You couldn't do hard labor, but you were able to sew and do all sorts of other things. So since you did something, we don't make you make up the days. Now we go back to the Haguf Kashu. So that resolved the contradiction between the two sources. Now we have, but this source doesn't make any sense. You said 3, you don't have to make up 3 if you were sick for 3 years. Ha'arba, but from there you would imply 4 years, chayav lashlim, you would have to make up the days. But Ema Seifa, the second line says, chala kol shesh chayav lashlim. If you were sick all 6, then you have to make it up, which sounds like only all 6, like you didn't work a day. But ha'arba, if it was 4, in chayav lashlim, you wouldn't have to make up the days. So how do we explain this? Hachikama, this is the way you should read it. Chala arba na'asa kemisha chala kol shesh v'chayav lashlim. 3 is the kala. 3 or less, you don't have to make up. Any more than that, you're already more than half the days you didn't work. That's as if you didn't work at all, and you're going to have to make up the days that you missed. So that was all. We got to this because we were talking about all the people who get and the people who don't get. Boreach doesn't get. And then we had a machloket about if you pay your way out early, do you get or not? We had a machloket. And then from there, we got to the sick days and that issue, because that was just brought up because of the Braita. When we asked the question about the Boreach, doesn't the Boreach have to make up the days, even though the sick doesn't? And then maybe the sick does, and then we dealt with that. Tanu Rabbanan. Now we get to, and this is going to take us for a while, Kama Mani Kimlo. We'll already be in Talmud Bet when we finish this section. What do you get for a gift? Now, what did the Torah say again? You get a gift, double language, ha'anik ta'aniklo, mitzoncha, migornecha, umiyikvecha. Okay, from your animals, from your goren, where you have your food, your wheat, all that, and your yeket, from your wine. And then it said, Asher berach Hashem lokecha, that God blessed you, titain lo, give to him. Kama manikim lo. Now, there's no amount said in the Torah, but there are amounts said in the Torah in other places. So what we're going to do is we're going to connect this somehow to different amounts said in the Torah. And we're going to have 3 different opinions about which one we're going to connect it to. So you might remember, we talked about this with the money, right? When we had the whole money sugya, all different things that were mentioned in the Torah. So we're not going to go back to the rapist and the seducer and the motzi shem ra, the one who says, my wife didn't have her virginity and she lied about it. But we are going to go back to the other ones. 5 slaim of each type, okay, from the tzon, the goren, and the yeket. But, right, and that's all together 15. Okay. Pretty simple math. The Gemara is going to ask what? He's telling us mathematics, that 5 times 3 is 15. We know that, okay? And Devar Rabbi Meir, where does he get 5 slaim from? Who knows? What's the 5 slaim? From Pidyon Ben, from the redemption of the firstborn, you pay 5 slaim. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Shloshim, Kishloshim Shel Eved. Rabbi Yehuda says it's 30 because if my ox gored your slave, your Canaanite slave, okay, here specifically Canaanite slave, because your Canaanite slave is you're owned by you, and right, like part of your property. If he killed your slave, then let's say my ox killed your slave, I have to pay you 30 shekels according to Torah law. So 30 or 30 slaim. So 30 like the 30 of the Eved. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Chamishim sheba arachin. Arachin is this law where if I say I'm giving my value or your value or somebody's value to the temple, so the maximum amount there is a man in his prime ages of life. We pay 30 shekel for his value. 50 shekel for his value. Okay, so 50 slaim. Okay, just like that. So now we're going to go into depth into each one and why he gets it from there and why he doesn't agree with the other opinions. Amar. So starting with the first. Chamesh slaim mikol min v'min. Shem 15 slaim. Divrei Rabbi Meir. That's just a quote. Rabbi Meir minyana atalash muinan. So the first question is, what? He's telling us simple math, that it's 15. Kakamashma. Now, why did he tell us this? Mivtzarhu de lo mivtzar le mehai minyana. You can't do any less than that amount. V'batzalu michad min v'tafet le michad mina late lamba. But if you don't have 5 of each, as long as you have 15 altogether, okay, and some people say you have to have at least a little bit of, give him at least a little bit of each one. But if you don't have 5 of this, you could give him, you have 2 of this, give him 8 of the other one. As long as you have 15 altogether, that's what's important. Okay, and that's why he said 15. Now we have to go back and say, though, but where does he get this from? Why does he say we learn this from Bechor, from the firstborn? My Tamid Rabbi Meir, and each one's going to have a Gzera Shava here. Yalet rekam mi Bechor. It says by Bechor, lo yiru et panai rekam, and you won't come to see me without empty-handed, okay, and that's where laws of before. Some of them go to the temple, but here basically it's saying rekam, and it's written right after it says b'chol b'chor banecha tifdeh. Okay, it was talking about the pidyon chamol and the pidyon of the b'chor. So don't come to God empty-handed, and then by us it says lo tishalchenu rekam. Don't let him leave empty-handed. So there you have Malahalang Chamesh Slaim, Afkan Chamesh Slaim. Since there it's 5, here it's 5. Now you're asking Miriam, wait, rekam appears somewhere else. We're going to get there, okay? Ve'ema Chamesh Slaim Mikulu. So the first question is, why don't you say 5 altogether, right? If it's 5 Slaim, it's 5 Slaim. Why do you have 5 of tzon, 5 of, right? It doesn't say that in the pasuk. It doesn't say rekam 3 times. Iktiv rekam levasof kidikamarta. So this is a classic, I think, one of those cases where they just knew it was the case, and maybe they also wanted to minimize the dip, right? Rabbi Meir didn't want to say something so majorly different from the others, but the reason you could, in my mind, argue this the logic opposite, but what they say is the following. The way the Psukim work is this. Don't let him go empty-handed. That's Pasuk 1. The next Pasuk says, give him from your tzon, your goren, your yetev. So now they say, if it had said it at the end, give him from your tzon, your goren, your yetev, don't let him go empty-handed, then we would have said empty-handed is 5, and that refers to all 3 that we already mentioned. But since first it said empty-handed, and then it said each type, shtei rekam tzon, rekam goren, rekam yetev. The word rekam is viewed as applying separately to each one. So rekam means 5, and then by each one. Now they ask the question you asked Miriam, which is Nelef rekam rekame olah riyah. Why don't you learn it from the korban olah? That's the, if I asked you where in the Torah it says empty-handed, it's the pasuk about going 3 times to the temple, 3 times a year at the holidays, and there's an actual obligation when you go there not to come empty-handed. You have to bring a korban olah called the olah riyah, and there's actually a debate, and again, this is something we just don't have time for today, but there's a debate there whether by Torah law it has to be a certain minimum amount. We actually conclude in Chagiga that by Torah law, that a korban can be any amount, but by rabbinic law, it has to be a minimum. Either which way, the minimum, either by Torah or by the rabbinic law, is 2 me'ah, which is a much smaller amount than this amount. So why? Basically, it's saying why not that lower amount, or maybe no amount at all, because some people say there is no minimum amount by Torah law. Either which way, it's a much lesser amount. Why don't we learn it from there? This is something we're going to see a few times. Because it says asher beracha, it doesn't just mean because you're blessed with a lot, but it means give a larger amount. So if we have a choice between 2 amounts, we're going to pick the larger. In a minute, we're going to see someone actually says something a little bit opposite that, but right now we're going to say we go with the larger. That explained Rabbi Meir, explained why he said 15, because max it, right, it means 15. It could be any breakdown in the end. And where do we get it from? From the Bechor. And how? Because of the Gzera Shava. And why don't we use the Gzera Shava of something else? Because we go by the larger amount. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, shloshim k'shloshim shel eved. Now, I want you to just notice already a difference between the second 2 and the first. The first said 5 of each equals 15. Now we just get a total amount, no connection to the tzon, goren, yekev. The Gemara is going to ask about that later. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, shloshim k'shloshim shel eved. My time with Rabbi Yehuda. Where did he get 30 of an eved? Yalat nitina me'eved. A different Gzera Shava. It says here, Asher barach Hashem lokecha titein lo, give to him. By the Eved, it says yitein la Adonai. You're going to give to the master if you kill, right? If your shore, your ox killed the Eved. So ma lahalan shloshim afkan shloshim. So since there it's 30, here it's 30. Now we're going to do the same thing we did in the previous. But by erchin, also when it comes to valuations, the word nitina appears there. You know, here it's a little bit tricky. It doesn't appear in the section of giving the person's amount value to the temple, but in that same chapter in Vayikra 27, it talks about if you sanctify your field to the temple, and then it says the Kohen figures out how much until the Yovel year, in other words, to what's the amount that you redeem it. He counts how many years left till the Jubilee year, and based on that, he comes up with an evaluation. And it says there, V'natan et ha'erkacha b'yom hahu kodesh Hashem. You have to give that amount to the temple, whatever the Kohen decides. So, since it says nitina there, in other words, again, why'd you pick that nitina, not that nitina? Malalan chamishim afkan chamishim, they're the highest amount. Again, it's a little tricky because that pasuk was talking about land, but we're talking about when it comes to an amount mentioned in the Torah by value, and there it's valuation of people. The highest is 50. So they give two answers. Why didn't he take erchin? Number one, chada, and here's the opposite of what we said about asher beracha, which is we always go by the higher amount. Well, tafasta meruba lo tafasta, tafasta muat tafasta. There's a term that we know from other places, right? Don't try to do too much. They say, right? You try to do too much, you lose out. Don't go too high, okay? Let's not exaggerate, okay? You try to do too much, that's too much. Maybe also people can't handle that much. It's too much to ask of the master, so go for the lower amount. If you have a choice, I'd rather learn slave from slave, which is right. Again, there are two different slave cases, but one is the gift you give to a slave from if the slave gets killed, how much do you pay? I'd rather do that than learn from something totally disconnected to slaves. Rabbi Shimon. Now we're moving to Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon, where does he get it from? Now we're going to do the reverse of our previous sugya. Gamar nitina nitina me'arachin. Gzera shava nitina nitina from erachin. Malalan chamishim afkan chamishim. So now they say ve'ema bepachot shebe'erachin. So the first question is, okay, we're going to later go back to why don't you just say from the Eved? But right, basically taking the whole argument we said for Rabbi Yehuda and flipping it as a question onto this. But we'll get there in a minute. The first question is, why don't you go by a lower number by erchin? There are different values of different people and different ages and what they're valued at. Asher berach Hashem elokechati, because it says blessing, right? As if we have to go by the higher amount. V'neilach nitina nitina me'eved. Well, if you already have this nitina nitina gzera shava, why don't you learn the gzera shava that we just talked about of Rabbi Yehuda? Malalan shloshim afkan shloshim. And furthermore, better to take that for the two reasons we proved Rabbi Yehuda, which is chada tafasta meruba lo tafasta. Don't go for too high. And od eved me'eved havalei melech. And better to learn from eved than from erchin, which has nothing to do with slaves. So to which we reject the nitina gzera shava. You're right. If it's nitina, you're better off learning nitina from the other case. Must be as a different gzera shava, which is Rabbi Shimon micha gamar. He had. Okay, by us, it says ki yamuch achicha. If you become impoverished and you sell yourself as a slave, and by the same pasuk we saw before about the erchin, it said, in a different case, a different pasuk in the erchin section, it says if you give your value to the temple, and then imachu me'erkacha, let's say you don't have the money to afford what you promised to the temple, the Kohen comes in and evaluates what you can pay, and you pay the amount he does. So both have this micha element of someone who's so poor. From there, we learn the Gzera Shava, and that's how he gets to erchin. Okay, now that was all the three opinions. Now we have to deal with the Tzon, Goren, and Yekev, and what it has to do with anything when it comes to Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda. Because Bishlam other Rabbi Meir, he makes a lot of sense. Tzon, Goren, Yekev, because you need 5 of each. Ella, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, Tzon, Goren, Yekev, Lamani, what do you need it for? They need it for the following Braita. As it says in a Braita. You might have thought from the pshat of the pasuk it has to be one of those 3 things. From where do we learn it could be anything? Classic, right? Prat, details, and then klal, general term. The general term includes everything. But well, then you really don't need to specify if it's just going to be everything. So, what's unique about them? And this is what we usually say about a klal prat, or depending on which kind. But since there's all these details, it has to be something similar to the details. What's unique about them? Actually connects with asher berachacha. They're things that multiply, become fruitful, grow, right? All that. So, what's not called growing or multiplying? Well, Yatzuk Safim Devrei Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon says, don't give him money, because money doesn't multiply. Money, it doesn't grow, can't turn into more. Now, you might say it can. We'll get back to that. But right now, money itself doesn't really grow and doesn't multiply, obviously. So, right, money doesn't grow on trees, as they say. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer Yatzu Pradot. Mules can't reproduce. So he says it comes to exclude mules. Now, why does each one exclude one and not the other? Rabbi Shimon, Pradot Mishpacham Begufayu. They might not multiply, but just like the grapes, right, can grow, and the produce from the ground can grow, also animals can grow stronger, bigger, can do more work. So they do grow, even though they can't multiply. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Ksafim abebu iska. What do you mean money can't make money? We all know you can invest money and make more money from it. So that's why each one didn't hold by the other. Utsricha. Now, why do you need all three? If you just had sown, you would have thought only animals, but not things that grow from the ground. Therefore, katav rachmana goren. That's why you needed goren. Now we're going to say the exact reverse. If you just had goren, ikatav goren havamina gidule karka im bale chayim lo. You would have thought just things that grow, but not animals. Therefore, katav rachmana tzon. So that's why you need sown and goren. So that gets kind of the main categories. But yekev lamali, that's also something that grows. So what do you need that for? Moving down to Amabet. Well, lemar lemute ksafim, lemar lemute peho. That extra word is coming to say we're going to exclude one more thing. What's it coming to exclude? It's coming to say, and what it's really saying is everything else is actually included as well, but only if it also grows or multiplies. Okay, and that's what the extra word is for. That's how we explained those three terms and what they're doing there for Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda. Now we're moving on to the Asher Beracha, Tanu Rabbanan. Now we already explained Asher Beracha in a few ways. The simple reading was, since you've been blessed and since you're once a slave, you should know what it's like to be a slave. You should treat them well, give them severance pay. The second is Asher Beracha is give them more, right? If you're going to have a choice between two things, go with the higher. Obviously, that was balanced at certain points by, well, too much is too much, right? Don't do too much, but don't try to cut off, by more than you can chew. But here we're going to all of a sudden read this pasuk in a very different way. Asher Beracha Hashem Elokecha, Yachol nitbarech bayet biglalo, manikim lo. Lo nitbarech bayet biglalo, ein manikim lo. What does it mean, Asher Berach Hashem Elokecha? That your house was blessed. Why was your house blessed? Because you had a good slave. Okay. This, by the way, seems to be referencing, and we saw in this week's parsha also another thing like this. Some of the laws in Dvarim are based on narratives in Sefer Breshit. Okay. For example, Yibum is based on the whole David, the whole Yehuda and Tamar story, Yehuda's sons. The whole, if you have two wives and one you love and one you hate, don't try to make this the one you love, right? Don't make him the Bechor, give him twice like Yosef. Okay, what's this? This is, first of all, the Yaakov and Lavan story. If you remember, Yaakov leaves Lavan's house with a lot. The whole Ha'anakah can be learned from there. And specifically because, right, he blessed Lavan's house, he gets more also. Yosef was a slave in Potiphar's house, and his house was blessed from it. So you see this idea that slaves can cause blessing. You might have thought here that maybe Asher Beracha means because the slave caused your house to be blessed. And now if we go back to labor laws, this is like saying maybe you only get a bonus if you worked, you reached your numbers, you got your quotas, okay? If he made your house worth more, then you do it. But lo nitbarech, maybe you don't get, right? Like in Israel, for example, in the summer, they give Demei Havra'ah. That's extra money they give every worker. It doesn't matter. It's the opposite. It doesn't matter if you were a terrible worker or a good worker. The law is you get it no matter what. So that's the question here. Talmud Lamach, ha'anik ta'anik. Remember we said double language? Mikol makom. He gets the gift no matter what, even if your house wasn't blessed on account of him. Im kematam lomar asher beracha. So then why does it say the he, right? Now I understand asher beracha. It's asher beracha Hashem Elokecha, that God blessed. But they're saying berachecha, that your Eved blessed your house. Hakol lefi bracha tein lo. Now this is interesting. This is a combination. While it's true you're going to get the Demei Havra'ah no matter what, you're going to get this money, this Hanukkah, this gift, no matter what. But if he made you a millionaire, then you have to give him more money, okay? If he blessed your house, then you have to give him even more than that. So the minimum is either the 15, the 30, or the 50. But beyond that, you have to give him more if he blessed your house. Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah Omer, Dvarim Tichtavan. He says, no, read it as it says. Now, again, not the pshat reading, but the way we just suggested. Nitbarech bayit biglalo manikim lo. Lo nitbarech bayit biglalo e manikim lo. If he didn't help your house be more fruitful and more financially stable, he doesn't get anything. Im ke matam malomar ha'anik ta'anik. So then why does it say double language? Tibrat Torah l'sham bnei adam. This is an approach of many rabbis. Don't make so much out of one little word, right? The Torah, people use that term. Okay, we would never use it in English, but in the Hebrew language, people speak in double language sometimes, and it doesn't mean anything. It's not meant to be darshan. So we have a machloket about whether this whole thing of a gift goes to you anyway, or only specifically if you cause bracha in the house. Tanu Rabanan. Now we're moving on. So that was, again, we dealt with Hanakah in a lot of different ways, this gift that you get. Number one, which slave gets it, which slave doesn't. We basically excluded the one who runs away and that other issue of Geraon Kesef, where there was a machloket. I see, Debbie, you're saying, I was also thinking about this, how what we didn't define is how we define in this last issue, how we define how much he blessed her house and how much he's supposed to get. That's a whole, it's very subjective. Yes, it's not clear from there what it is. Okay, so we had who gets the gift, then we had how much you get and where we learn it from, and then we had, do you get it no matter what, or do you get it only if you caused the house to be blessed? Now we go to this inheritance issue. Tanu Rabanan. Eved ivri ovedet haben ve'eno ovedet habat. A regular Jewish slave, if the master dies, he goes right to the son, but not to the daughter. Now we say daughter or brother, they're going to be interchangeable because laws of inheritance are it goes to the daughter if there's daughters and no sons, from Benot Slavchad, thanks to them. And then if there's no daughters, it goes to the brother. So any other heirs are in a different category than the son. Yes, it goes to the son, but you don't get passed on to daughters or brothers of the deceased. Okay, so these three, the Amai Ivriya, the Nirtza, the one who stays past their years and gets his ear pierced, right? And the one who gets sold to a Gentile, they do not go to anybody. The master dies, they are freed. So now we're going to go and see what are the sources for this. Amar Mar, where do we get this from? Ditanu Rabanan, the Braita says, Avadcha sheshanim. Now we go back to this. I mentioned it before. He worked for you for 6 years. That means l'chavalo yoresh, you and not your heirs. On the other hand, right, l'chavalo yoresh. Now yoresh here we mean an heir that's not your son. Oh, eno ela l'chavalo ben. Maybe it means you and not your son. Maybe it doesn't go to your son or any heir. Now we get to something we had yesterday, the same kind of structure. We have one pasuk which says you're going to work for 6 years, which sounds like no matter what, whether I'm alive or the master's alive or the master's not alive. Then we have you're only going to work for the master for 6 years. So how do we reconcile that? One is limiting, one is including more. So we're going to basically say, right, obviously the son is the first heir, so he's going to be the one who gets to keep the slave, and anyone else, if there are no sons, then the slave is not going to be passed on to anybody else. And that's what we do with those two psukim, to which the Gemara says, Umara'ita. Well, l'rabot et habenu lo tziata'ach. Now, everyone, it's clear that the daughters are kind of less than the sons because in terms of laws of inheritance, that's pretty clear. And there's no other reason to think a daughter would get something more than a son would get. But when it comes to the brother does have one up on the son. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But they're going to say, why specifically a son, yes, and not a brother? The reason brother is going to be stronger than, son is going to be stronger than brother is because there's two cases where we see that a son fulfills the job of the father exactly as the father would do it. Number one, Yehud. If you buy an Amai Ivriya, a Jewish maidservant, either you can marry her or your son can marry her. Your brother can't marry her. It's not an option. The options of Yehud are only for the son. So what do you see? The son takes the place of the father, but the brother does not. Stei achuzah is what we talked about before. If I sanctify my field, we didn't really get into it, but if I sanctify my field and then I don't pay the value and the Yovel Yor comes, it becomes the Kohanim's property. I don't get it back in the Yovel Yor, even though if I sold it to someone else, I would get it in the Jubilee year. But if I didn't buy it back, right, buy it back basically means I give the money to the temple and then I get my land back. If I don't do that, it goes to the Kohanim. But if I buy it back before the Jubilee year, it goes to me. What if you buy back my land? I sanctify my land. I haven't redeemed it. You theoretically could buy that land from the temple, which basically means you give the money to the treasury and then you get the land. And in that case, what happens to it in the Jubilee year? It goes to the Kohanim. It doesn't go to me because I didn't redeem it. But if my son redeems it, it goes back to me. Okay, so there you have it. We're going to learn in a few minutes that this doesn't say so in the Torah, but it was known to them that this was the case. So here you see, and the brother redeems it, it goes to the Kohanim in the Jubilee year, it doesn't go back to me. So that's where the son takes the place of the father, basically, that if the son buys it back, from the temple. When the Jubilee year comes, it goes back to the father. So the son takes place of the father. So here you see, in two ways, we're going to say, therefore, the son is obviously stronger than the brother. To which they say, what are you talking about, though? The brother takes the place of his own brother. In what case? We all know, in Yibum. Sheken kam tachat achiv liyibum. So that, there you see, the son marries, right? And the brother gets to take the place of his brother, and the son doesn't, which the Gemara says, obviously the son doesn't. There is no son in that case. It's not like brother versus son like we did in the previous. There is no son. It's only in a place where there is no son. There is no son. Of course, the brother gets, because there is no son. It's not like before we said, if the brother did it versus if the son did it, well, the son's going to get it, the brother's not, or it's going to be, right, the son's going to be like the father, the brother's not. Here, there is no comparison. So that's not a good question. To which the Gemara says, okay, so yesh ben, elam kam shein ben, yesh ben en yibum. Ella. So now they're going to say, according to what you just said, only because we knocked it out because of this, we would basically, otherwise, maybe you would say the brother is just as strong. But how could you say that, right? Halav hachi achadif, what you're going to say without that argument that we just said, which is there is no yibum when there's no son. So it's not like a race brother-son and brother stronger. V'tepukle, either which way, you wouldn't have a good argument. You can't knock out the first argument with the yibum for a different reason. By the brother, we said he does yehud and ste'achuzah. That's two places where the son takes the place of the father. But in the case of the brother, we only have one of yibum. So of course, two is stronger than one. So even without knocking out the yibum, you still wouldn't have an argument. To which the answer, how did they learn ste'achuzah, that the son is like the father? Because yibum is not a claim. In other words, it was really one against one. It was yehud versus yibum. And since yehud won out, because yehud is son versus brother, and yibum is brother versus nobody, because there is no son, then it shows that son is stronger than brother. Once we show son is stronger than brother, when it comes to laws of ste'achuzah, that's how they learned laws of ste'achuzah. So it's not really two against one, because the two was only on account of that difficulty that we just raised. Okay, we started with the Amai Ivriya. We started with Eved Ivri. How do we know Eved Ivri? The son gets it, not the brother or the daughter. That we just proved. Now we're going to go to Amai Ivriya. How do we know that she gets freed when he dies and doesn't go to any heirs? Where do we get this from? Amar Rabbi Pedada Amar Kra Afla Amatchata Sekin. We have to go back to our verses to understand what's going on here. It's actually a difficult verse. If you look in Rashi in the Torah, he's going to actually quote part of our Gemara further down, although he's quoting it from the Sifri, but it's the same idea, which is the Torah says, let me just find it. In Dvarim Tevav, Pasuk Yud Zayin. Okay, first it talks about giving a gift. Then it moves on to a slave who doesn't want to leave his master. And what do? We pierce his ear and he becomes Eved Olam. At the end of that pasuk, after it says he becomes your slave forever, it says Va'afla amatchata sekin, and the same is true for your ama. Now, wait a minute. Didn't we say nirtza is only for a male, not for a female? So that pasuk makes no sense in terms of what we know to be the case. So we're going to have a problem with that pasuk. Hikisha katuv l'nirtza. So now they're going to say, what is that meant for? It's to say an Amai Ivriya is like an Eved Nirtza in a particular way. What way is that? Ma Nirtza ino oved lo etaben v'lo etabat, af Amai Ivriya no oved lo etaben v'lo etabat. Exactly for our issue. Just like, which we saw in our Mishnah, that the Nirtza goes free when the master dies. Doesn't matter who inherits. The Ama, same thing. We haven't yet seen the source for that. We're going to see it in a minute. So the Gemara says, what are you talking about? It's coming for that. It's needed for this drasha, and this is the drasha that Rashi quotes on the Torah. What it means is it's referring to a few psukim earlier. She also gets a gift, not that she also gets to stay longer. She doesn't stay longer ever. She can't pierce her ear and stay more beyond her time. But she does get the gift, to which the Braita says, maybe it means she could get her ear pierced and stay longer. And this we already saw. If If the slave says, I like living here, I want to stay here, and what do we learn from ha'eved? Just male, not female. Hare ritziyamu. So there, right? Hama is, so that's for ritziyah. So it can't possibly be that the ama can also do ritziyah, right? Pierce her ear. So hama ani mekayim va'af lamatchata seken lahani. So it must be referring to the section before, which is the gift. Im ken nichtov kra la'amatcha ken. So now, if it's teaching you lahani, it can't teach you about laws of inheritance. How can we learn laws of inheritance from here? Ben, going back to the same argument we keep making. Well, if so, the pasuk should have said la'amatcha ken. Instead, it said my ta'aseh, right? It said va'af la'amatcha ta'aseh ken. It could have just said and such for your ama. It says and such you should do for your ama. From there, you can learn two things. Shema min hatart. Last proof of the three, right? We went through the all the cases now. Now we're getting to the last two proofs. How do you know that a nirtza and one that's sold to a Gentile, ein oved lo tabev lo tabat, goes free when the master dies, doesn't get passed down inheritance? Nirtza dichtiv ratza adonav does no b'martzeh v'avado la'olam. Who does it say here? Ratza adonav et hamartzeh v'avado la'olam, and he works for him forever, meaning him and not anyone else. V'lo tabev v'lo tabat. Nimkar lo ve'kochavim minayim. Where do we get sold to a Gentile? Amar Chizki amar Kra v'chishav im konehu. When you buy your way out of there, when you redeem yourself, if someone redeems you, they make an assessment with the one who bought you, meaning only the one who bought you and not anyone else. Okay? V'nat loim yorshei kaneh. Now, this drasha leads Rava to say the following thing, off topic. But what do you learn from here? The fact that the Torah has to tell you that Oved Kochavim's kids do not inherit, special law here teaches you what? In general, there are inheritance laws by Torah law of Gentiles. Gentiles inherit their parents by Torah law. That's what Rav is going to say right now. Amar Rav Dvar Torah Oved Kochavim Yoresh et Aviv. How do we know? Shneimar v'chishavim koneh v'lo yorshei koneh. Michlal v'yitlei yorshim. From here you see, he obviously has heirs, because if he didn't have heirs, you wouldn't need a drasha to say his heirs don't get the Eved. Of course they don't get the Eved. There is no such thing as heirs. Obviously there's laws of Yerusha by Torah law. But where is there not laws of Torah of Yerusha by Torah law? A convert, remember we said a convert is if he's born new. That means he doesn't inherit from his father because his father's not his father by Torah law. But by rabbinic law, he does. And this is a fascinating law. So first they're going to prove how you know he doesn't inherit by Torah law. And then they're going to say, why does he inherit by rabbinic law? And that's what we'll finish up today, which is, how do we know this? So first we're going to prove how we know there's no Torah law of Yerusha. We have two brothers, one converted, one didn't. And the father dies, he's not Jewish. So what happens? In splitting the inheritance, you take all his idols, I'll take the money. You take his wine he offered up to his gods, because I can't do anything with that, and I'll take the produce. But if they already came to his possession and they were his, and then he said, let's split them, then he's already benefiting from idol worship. So only if they split it up from the beginning. Okay, but if they came to his possession first and then he said, I want to trade you, he can't, because then he's benefiting from idol worship, which he can't. So now, how do laws of inheritance work? If laws of inheritance, when do they kick in? As soon as the father dies, which means as soon as the father dies, if Torah law would say you inherit, everything belongs to both of them, which means as soon as he starts splitting a 50-50 and saying, but I want this and you take that, he's already benefiting from the idols. So, right, if you think it's Torah law, even if it didn't come into his domain, it would still be a problem. Anything he takes from the inheritance is basically saying, I'm taking this instead of the idol worship, the idol stuff, the idols, and therefore it's going to end up he's benefiting from idols. So therefore it must be midrabanan, ve'gzerahu da'avi rabbanan. Why did they inherit by rabbinic law? Shema yachzor l'sulo. Imagine the convert converts, then his father dies, and the Torah says, sorry, you don't get inheritance. He's going to say, you know what? It might not pay for me to be Jewish. I might have a big inheritance coming, and I'm going to lose my inheritance just because I'm a Jew. So in order to prevent it from going back to being a Gentile, the rabbi said, Torah law says you're going to, rabbinic law says you're going to get inheritance. Okay, we'll stop here, and then we'll prove a brighta tomorrow that says it, and we'll continue along in this topic. That's it for today. So again, we talked about Hanukkah, gifts, who gets it, how much, and then we went into inheritance laws. Number one, how slaves get passed down from inheritance. And since we got to that, and we got to the one who's owned by a Gentile, from there we got into inheritance laws of Gentiles. The Gentiles obviously inherit by Torah law. There's a unique exception here that they don't inherit of Eved Ivri. Okay, and then we have the distinction between a regular Eved Ivri who gets passed on to sons, not to daughters, whereas all the other types of slaves don't get passed on to anybody. And each of those we learn from Psukim. That's it for today. We will catch up from here, close to the end of the daf, and in tomorrow's daf. Have a great day, everyone.